Welcome to Fraud Friday. I'm Bob Coleman. Today we're talking about Stephanie Hockridge, 120 months in federal prison for her role in the Blueacorn PPP loan fraud. If you're watching this, you pretty well know about her $69 million. Let me give you the exact amount of her restitution for the fraud. First of all, Blueacorn got over $1 billion in fees from PPP loans. They were infamous for preparing fraudulent PPP loan applications to take advantage of the system. Her motivation was for every loan that she processed, she got a fee from the U.S. government. Blueacorn was not a lender. They worked with other lenders and they got a significant portion of that fee. The feds allege, I guess I don't have to say that anymore, over $1 billion in fees. And I've said before, white collar crime it is portrayed as a victimless crime. It is not. During that period, small businesses needed those funds and they ran cavalier over people in need, and they did everything for their benefit to line their own pockets. Today for her is Judgment Day. Here are the details. The judge said 120 months, 10 years in jail. He said, we're going to try to get you, though, into Byron Federal Prison. That is infamously known with Giselle Maxwell. That seemed to be playing up. And she has to report on Tuesday, December 30th at 2 p.m. The court, I love this. The court did not order a fine because the defendant does not have the financial resources or future earning capacity to pay a fine. She was ordered to pay a special assessment. I do know she is living in Puerto Rico and in a pretty nice condo there, so I don't know how someone can live in a nice condo that don't have financial resources, but I'm going to let the Department of Prisons and other people figure that out. What I want to talk about today are the restrictions placed on her, and I haven't covered this before, but I find this interesting. The primary viewers of this podcast are bankers. We love numbers, we love logistics, we love the stats. So here are the financial stats that she is facing. The restitution amount is $63,952,063.64. That restitution order by this judgment remains unpaid, and it's going to follow her the rest of her life. It is a financial death penalty. The judge says when she gets a job, she has to begin making monthly installments of not less than 10% of her gross monthly income, or at a rate of not less than $1,000 a month. I have not done the math of what 69,952,000 is divided by 1,000, but I think it's a long time. Payment shall begin no later than 60 days after her defendant's release from confinement, and shall continue each month until the balance is paid in full. In addition, at least 50% of receipts received from gifts, tax returns, inheritances, bonuses, lawsuit awards, and any other receipt of money shall be paid toward the balance within 15 days of receipt. And this payment plan does not affect the government's ability to go after her through garnishment procedures. I thought this was interesting in reading what the terms of her probation are. And the judge set that up that, okay, you get the 10 years, and I know you have an ability to knock that off for good behavior and everything else. Obviously, a significant time in jail. And as an aside, it's interesting before I get into this specific detail. She was found guilty by the jury in June of 2025. There were 5 counts. She was convicted on the most serious count, which was conspiracy to commit wire fraud. 4 other individual accounts, the jury found her not guilty. And that is surprising, not in the particular aspects of this case, but juries in these cases, when they finally do go to trial, rarely find not guilty verdicts. I'm always fascinated by that. whole other conversation of, are these types of prosecutions fair? And when someone ends up in that system is a horrendous situation for them personally, but it fails to take into account all the harm they really, really did. So she was found guilty. Her sentencing was November 20th. She reports December 30th. Her husband faces similar charges, Nathan Reese. Now, he was scheduled to go to trial after her verdict. He pled guilty to one count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. His sentence is in December. I believe it's December 18th. I don't know what type of time he's facing, but it's interesting that they are trying to get a staggered sentence where she will serve her time and he will serve his time, because they have an infant child. And so one does one and the other does it after one is released, as her petition said, not to make the child an orphan. That's whether the judge will go for that, I have no clue, but that's what they are posturing and positioning with the judge in terms of when he finally receives his sentence. But I found this interesting, that these are pretty stringent conditions for her 2 years probation. Afterwards is that she has to be monitored. She has to tell them when they move, tell them if there's you must live in a place approved by the probation officer. If you plan to change where you live or anything about your living arrangements, such as the people you live with, you must notify the probation officer at least 10 days before the change. In notifying the probation officer in advance, if notifying the probation officer in advance is not possible, you must notify them within 72 hours. So her life is going to be carefully monitored, whether she likes it or not. You must allow the probation officer to visit you at any time at your home or elsewhere. And you must permit the probation officer to take any items prohibited by the conditions of your supervision that he or she observes in plain view. In this particular case, she's charged with, you must not own, possess, or have access to a firearm, ammunition, destructive device, or dangerous weapon, i.e. anything that was designed or was modified for the specific purpose of causing bodily injury or death to another person, such as nunchucks or tasers. You must not act in any agreement with a law enforcement agency to act as a confidential informant without their permission. I thought that was interesting. You must not communicate or interact with anybody that you know is engaged in criminal activity. If you know someone has been convicted of a felony, you must not knowingly communicate or interact with that person without first getting permission of the probation officer. Restrictions on travel. When you are questioned by your probation officer, you must answer truthfully, and your life is monitored. Now, I found this interesting. Employment. You must work full-time, at least 30 hours per week of a lawful type of employment, unless the probation officer excuses you from doing so. If you do not have full-time employment, you must try to find full-time employment unless the probation officer excuses you from doing so. If you plan to change where you work, you need his or her approval. And whatever job that you are approved to work in, she must give 10% of her earnings over to start whittling down that $69 million, which was the loss that the government calculated on the amount of PPP loans that were fraudulent, that were not eligible to be covered by all the COVID stimulus that was passed by Congress and signed off by the respective presidents. So the scheme that she undertook, the greed that she exhibited, has certainly manifested itself in this type of tragic result. And it is tragic. It's tragic for her. It's tragic for her family. And it's tragic also for the victims. And I want to underscore that. These are not victimless crimes. I talked to many, many small business owners who were desperate for funds that the lenders totally ignored them. It went down the black rabbit hole of paperwork, and they were strung along. And as I've reported earlier, she had an extremely cavalier attitude toward these borrowers, which is, quote, "We were not the first bank to turn down a loan. F them." She was very concerned about, we're only going to focus on the large dollar amount loans that pay us the most. All those email exchanges and her interaction with her staff made it very clear. The motivation was to maximize the amount of fee income as possible from the U.S. government treasury to process these loans. And she had the special knowledge of how to coordinate that fraud and maximize her own personal income. I'm Bob Coleman. This is Fraud Friday.